I think that we've had a lot of ideas in front of us about things we could do. And I know that within our own business, a lot of times we're constantly talking about, well, we could do this, we could do that. And really one of the most important things I think a lot of us can do at this stage in our businesses is to actually find out what customers want us to do. And to go to them and find out what the use cases look like, and to talk with them about different types of thinking that they're doing internally. What are their challenges? In Anne's portion at the very beginning, when she asked us, when Marc asked us how well we know our customers. Anne asked us how well we know our customers. One of the things I put down is I know them reasonably well. I don't think I know them very well, but part of the reason I gave that answer is because my customer is constantly changing. And what I'm going to be presenting is really how quickly our customers are changing. Those of us who sell to a business audience will find that the conversations that we're having now are extraordinarily different from the ones we might have been having even 6 months ago. Some of my biggest customers have completely changed their mobile strategy and their platform strategy in a very, very short period of time. And so I think that a lot of the uncertainty that we're having in our own businesses around what should our platform strategy be can also go back to the fact that our customers themselves are changing very, very quickly. So we're in a very dynamic environment in which the platforms are changing, the technology is changing, the customers are changing, and it's no wonder that we have a lot of confusion internally about what to be doing with our businesses. And I think it simply behooves us all to be extremely dynamic and agile in how we think about how do we deliver content. I'm going to be presenting some results out of some free Pint research that we've conducted, now running over a 2-year period, looking at the enterprise market for mobile content. And I'm going to give a little bit of background as to why we selected this topic in the first place, really going back to 2010. But I also want to frame it, though, in a slightly different way than I have as I've given this talk, or variations of this talk, to a number of different audiences recently. I actually see a really important parallel in the buy side, in our own customer base, around what they're trying to think about in terms of delivering content to their employees, as to what we as publishers are trying to think about it when we deliver content to our customers. A lot of enterprise, large organizations today truly are publishers and aggregators in the way that we've traditionally thought of ourselves as publishers or perhaps aggregators, and that they're trying to serve a global audience that's a very mobile audience. They're not necessarily sitting at their desks anymore. They all want to access content that is in the way that they want to do it, whether that's on a handset or on a tablet or on a desktop or a laptop. And traditionally, enterprise organizations have put a lot of restrictions on the way that they're willing to deliver content. But a lot of that is really breaking down now. The norms around work are changing, and expectations around what people can and can't do with content are changing. And our buy-side customers are trying to figure this out for themselves. And I think there's a real opportunity for both buyers and suppliers of content to think through some of these questions together. We're really challenging some of the same assumptions. And it's an opportunity for us to work together to figure out what the answers to those challenges might look like. So about 6 to 12 months ago, a very common thing that we would hear from a lot of employees within organizations, large organizations, would be, why can't I get this on my phone? You know, so we deal a lot with the corporate content buyer for large organizations. And when I would ask them about how interested is your organization in mobile content, they say, well, we're getting some harassment from Sean over in Analysis. He wants to get this on his phone. He wants to read it on the subway. And they were somewhat dismissive of the kind of questions that they were getting around interest in mobile content. So it really didn't rise very highly on the corporate agenda. Even if they might be fielding 200 requests for this a week, this kind of request wasn't getting a whole lot of attention. What's happening now, though, is very different. Getting a lot more of my customers telling me that they're getting these kinds of requests, which is a CEO or a C-level or a senior executive saying, you get this content on my iPad and I don't care how you do it. And suddenly, there's a lot more urgency in figuring out these issues. A lot of the roadblocks where previously the content buyer might have been told, no, it's impossible. We could never do that. We could never get that through legal. We could never get that through compliance. Somehow, all of a sudden, we can never turns into, well, let's try to figure this out. So it might even be a smaller volume of requests, but it really matters the clout of the people who are asking and how the culture within the organization wants to support that type of ask. And that's not to say that the core challenges that the enterprise have been facing have changed. They still have to really work out some of those security and compliance and authentication issues, but they're much more motivated all of a sudden. And there really has been a shift in the last 6 to 8 months as we've seen a greater and greater uptake among people bringing their iPads to work, basically, and wanting to be able to do things on them that they couldn't necessarily do from a phone. They're much more inclined to make demands when they really have a resource that they like. I was doing a presentation a couple weeks ago with a colleague from Dow Jones, and one of the things that he commented on is that he refers to the iPad as finally the computer that even the CEO can use. And that's had a big impact on how much content they want to actually have accessible that way. So platform is now at the top of the corporate agenda in a way that it hasn't been in the past. And mobile has been the thing that's driving that forward, but it's having a much bigger impact than mobile. So even if mobile itself is not a huge piece of strategy for you and your content delivery to your customer, the platform conversation is becoming more and more important. And even if mobile today is not something that your customer base is active in, it will be within 5 years. If you think back to what Charlene presented at the beginning about the pace of adoption and how fast that's been accelerating, one of the trends that we definitely have seen in our research is that even when we first conducted it in 2010 and our interviewees were telling us we're not making any progress towards mobile, they all agreed, we know this is going to be more important. So even though they weren't necessarily making progress in that direction immediately, they know it's going to happen. I mean, the way that we're all interacting constantly with our jobs is changing. I mean, we sat in these rooms 2 years ago, and there was very little activity on handsets, let alone on iPads. I mean, there were maybe 1 or 2 early adopters that had that first generation iPad. And now it's simply a given. We're all carrying different types of devices with us all the time. I remember being in the last West Coast conference of this one, but I guess it was 2 years ago that we were back on the West Coast, and every single table in this room would have had 2 or 3 laptops open on it. And if you just look around the room now, there's a few, and there are people who are doing serious work, I see you, while we're talking. But for the most part, you've got people taking notes on iPads. They're keeping track with their email with a handset of some kind. I mean, that's a real shift that we've all internalized and perhaps don't even notice as much as we might have. So let's talk a little bit about the research and where the factual basis, the data basis that I'm going to be presenting from today. This is the second year that we conducted this research. It was published in 2012, but it's an ongoing project. We're constantly adding to the body of knowledge that we have around this. We're constantly adding conversations to the mix. They're based primarily on in-depth interviews, and the reason for this is because the issues at the enterprise level around content delivery are so complex and they touch so many different areas of an organization that we simply weren't able to get the texture to the information we wanted solely by using a survey methodology or something that would be a much broader suite. We used our VIP subscriber base, and these are people who purchase content on behalf of multinational global organizations. They're either the budget holder or the very strong influencer of that budget, but they tend to be on the information services side, the IS side, what used to be called the library might be in the information center, whoever's responsible for that content acquisition piece. They are not, very importantly, they are not on the IT side. And there's been very traditionally a lot of tension between IT and IS within these organizations because of the platform question, because the IS side will acquire or build or create content, but then has to rely on IT to develop the platform on which that content is delivered. And there's a very different orientation between what IS professionals would like to do with content, which is spread it around and make sure that everyone has access to it, and what IT professionals want to do, which is lock it down and make sure that it doesn't leak. And that's very much, those are both really important orientations in an organization, but it means that you've got a very different philosophy about what the purpose of content is within an organization. And that's created a lot of tension. Now, because of the urgency of mobility, those tensions are really starting to be addressed for the first time. I mean, I actually have people who almost are weeping with joy when they talk to me about how they're now able to have more collaborative relationships with people in IT. They're able to really work together with people in compliance and legal in ways that they never could before. But mobile is kind of a red herring in this case. They're actually now being able to address fundamental questions about platform in the enterprise because mobile has raised the stakes. So in 2010, when we first did this project, we conducted 27 interviews. And again, these are people who are purchasing content on behalf of large organizations. The key industries that we hit were professional services, tax and accountancies, government agencies, healthcare, legal, a range of areas where we had a strong base in the customers, so we understood what some of their needs were, and we're really able to go in depth with them and talk with them about what their issues were. For this current year, we re-interviewed or updated 20 of those people, and then we added 20 more. So we were able to both get start to get a sense from 20 people what's changed in 12 months, as well as add some industries, add some new questions, get a range of ideas coming off of that. And then we've also got some additional data from some other sources that I'll be talking to as well. So 12-month period from first interviews to last interviews. What's changed? There's much more meaningful demand in the enterprise. It's gone from sort of bubbling from junior levels and the odd early adopter to the CEO saying, get this on my iPad and I don't care how you do it. So it really has changed the stakes. There's a lot more pilot projects going on. In 2010, I had one of the 27 people telling me they were running a pilot project involving mobile content delivery. This year, everyone, if they hadn't already launched a pilot, was at least working towards one. And these were incredibly creative pilot projects that really surprised me at how innovative they were. There was one I'll mention that a highly regulated industry, a customer in the insurance field, where they were enabling people to bring their own iPads to work. This is solely a BlackBerry environment otherwise. And they were saying, okay, you can use your iPad to access content at work, but among other things, we're going to require you to give us the right to wipe your hard drive. So if it gets lost, if it gets nicked on the subway, if something happens to your device, we can remotely wipe your videos, your photos, everything off that thing. And those were their stakes for making this available within their organization. And they thought that was going to be a deal breaker for people. But within 2 days of announcing that the pilot was launched, it was already oversubscribed with people who wanted in on this. They wanted to try this. They were excited to. The other thing that happens when you've got pilot projects, in addition to creativity, is that you get a certain amount of authority. People can start to see how might this play out in the business environment. You get actual data based on how people use it, based on what the successes are. So there's a big shift that happens when you start doing pilots and start actually finding out. They're actually doing their own internal market research every time they do a pilot study, and it really builds a lot of momentum. There have also been some incredibly important technology shifts in the marketplace that I'm not going to go into in detail. We all know what they are. The advent of whatever generation we're on iPads, new tablets, proliferation of different types of devices and operating systems. There's also been an incredibly rapid change in attitude around what's the business benefit of getting content mobilely. This is one of the biggest surprises of the second year of research, is how fast things changed from year one to year two. I have never seen a 12-month differential that's this dramatic. And this is one of the areas where it was in. Whereas most of the interviews I conducted in 2010, people were saying, I just can't see why people would want this information on their mobile device. I just can't see why anybody would want to do this. And today, those are very different conversations. I credit the pilot projects in part for that. Once people start to get the hang of what they could do, they get a lot of excitement. So it's gone from, well, what could we possibly do, to look what we can do. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that in a few minutes. I've also seen this greater collaboration between divisions where there really is a need to foster more trust. And that's something that at least my customer base has been very excited by. They feel like they finally have a way of addressing some fundamental issues in how content and how information strategy plays out in their organizations, because mobile has raised the urgency, which I think is just a great opportunity to jump on for everyone. There are a number of things that also haven't changed, and I think these are really important caveats for any publisher to keep in mind. When I first started this research, one of the reasons we launched it was because we had so many publishers coming to us wanting us to review their iPad apps. Like, we came up with an iPad, here's our business strategy, we have an iPad app. But when we talked to our customer base about it, they couldn't care less. And we wanted to better understand why there was this huge gap between what the enterprise wanted and what vendors were excited by. These gaps were the biggest aha moments last year, but I want to highlight them again this year because they remain really important for our buyers. There are key issues that have to be overcome in security authentication. A small business and a consumer do not need to worry about information governance the way an enterprise organization does, particularly one that's in a regulated industry. If you are putting customer data on a mobile device, you have to be absolutely concerned that that device is going to go missing. It's much easier to lose your phone. It's much easier to lose your tablet than it is even to lose I carry a tiny little netbook around. It's just not going to lose it the same way that I could inadvertently leave my phone somewhere. These are huge issues for organizations. I mean, small organization, it'd be a nightmare. It might be a real issue. Big organization, I mean, it could be an SEC investigation. So they're not going to mess around with that kind of stuff. Authentication is another key piece. They've invested a huge amount of resources in, for example, IP-based authentication for getting into content. That's very easy to do now on desktop. It's still relatively challenging to do on a device, a handset. And that's something that a lot of organizations are varying in their degree to which they're going to really stick to that, but it is a big issue for a lot of organizations. There continues to be a focus on business requirements over user preferences. As much as the CEO might scream that I want this on my iPad, at the end of the day, they still are looking for business requirements and ROI to invest in making any kind of change, making sure that they're going to get this content available that way. There do remain significant disconnects between different areas of the enterprise and the industry. I think there's still more progress among publishers on moving towards a mobile strategy than there is among enterprise buyers on getting there with them. That gap is closing, but I think it still exists today. But at the same time, there's also this clear expectation that mobility is going to increase. Absolutely every person I've talked to, regardless of how willing their own organization is today to deliver content on mobile devices, they know this is where things are heading, and they know that 5 years down the road, we're not even going to be having this conversation anymore. It's going to be a done deal. So one way or another, we all have to get there. I want to share a couple other pieces here. We recently ran a webinar on making your organization mobile ready. And I had over 150 information managers attend this session. And we asked a number of questions on the front end and throughout the session, just to give you an idea of some sense of where this audience is. We asked them how developed their organization's work is today towards mobile deployment of content. And almost half of them said, we're only thinking about it. So there's urgency there, but there's not necessarily a lot of action yet. And of course, everyone's customer base is going to be a little bit different. But as a broad scope, this is what I learned from 150 participants who work at reasonably sized organizations with reasonably sized budgets who are constantly acquiring and moving content around. Almost half of them are still at the only thinking about it stage. Now, I do have almost half, about the same amount, who say that they have at least one pilot running or have completed a pilot. So I think if I had run this same question a year ago, the numbers would have looked completely different. And I think what's really the most remarkable is how fast that change is taking place, how fast even very risk-adverse organizations are moving towards piloting and testing this out. So other things that I want to highlight, a couple of the findings out of the report itself. So this meaningful demand question, who is asking within the organization and why? 2 years ago, we had very few high-level clout-driven requests for mobile content. Today, we're having a lot more of them, and naturally, it moves the agenda further, faster. And then what is the result of the ask? You're going to have a very different result if, say, the head of compliance gets excited about trying to figure out these issues, whereas as opposed to if you have the head of content acquisition getting excited about it. So these political and cultural issues are going to have a big impact on how quickly your customers are going to be able and willing to move forward. And at the same time, this was a really interesting comment that came out that was published in the report, where, there is a risk already existing because these devices are so compelling to people that they're finding ways of circumventing the restrictions that are in place. It's almost like the 2012 version of, well, I'm emailing content to myself so I can work on it at home, and that was the way people used to get around some firewall issues, and it was really naughty. And now they're finding ways of getting around the restrictions. So a lot of smart organizations are recognizing, you know what, we already have risk. We have more risk by not dealing with it than we have by trying to figure it out. So that's also moving things forward, even among some of the organizations that 12 months ago I would have said, I can't see them doing anything anytime soon, is these kinds of risks are having a big impact. Even among organizations that are just thinking about it, there are people within those organizations who want to be thinking harder and faster. And a lot of times I find those people, the intelligent people around content strategy, information strategy, and they know it's because there is going to come a day when they're expected to just be able to deliver. And these are really complex issues, and so they're reading everything they can find. They really want to partner with vendors. They want to know what your strategy is. They want you to help them figure this out so that when the day comes when they do have to suddenly deliver everything in a mobile environment, they're prepared and they're able to move forward with their organizations and not lose time. The authentication issue is still a really challenging one. This particular quote comes from one of my customers that is, he is very demanding. He wants vendors to solve all the problems for him. I think he's kind of an extreme case. He really expects vendors to figure this out. I think it needs to be a partnership. That if that's the most important thing to an enterprise, then they need to meet a vendor halfway and figure out how to make that happen. I remember reading about robotic theory a couple years ago where some really interesting developments happened when this robotics team, they were trying to come up with a way to help, if a robot fell down, how could it get back up again? And they were having this hard time figuring out, like you think about sort of that robot, the kid in the putting on the tubes and sort of walking around, and of course you fall down, you can't get up again. And this particular team flipped the problem on its head and said, we are going to assume that the robot will fall down. So how do we make it sustainable if it falls down? And they actually ended up designing a robot that could move regardless of what part of its body was on the ground. And I think the authentication issue is a similar one. You almost have to flip it on its head. You have to assume that it's going to be impossible to authenticate. So what does that do to the way you might partner with a vendor? And I think that ability to flip the problem on its head and say, okay, if this is an insurmountable problem, let's turn it upside down and assume that it's insurmountable and proceed from that basis. And that can be a very creative way of overcoming things like this particular customer that always wants everyone else to solve his problems for him. There are a lot more pilot projects, and I'm just going to share a couple quotes about what some of them are. And this has started to really overcome the question about, well, why would we possibly want content on mobile devices? It also reminds me a little bit about how, was it in the early 80s, people would say, I can see the use of maybe 500 computers in the world. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous. Everybody has 3 or 4 computers now. It's the same thing. I mean, once you start playing with mobile devices, they impact your workflow, and you can really think about how to put them to work. So there's great applications in multilingual interactions, both with customers and with internal needs. There's lots of marketing and sales applications. That's really one of the areas that's gotten some early adoption, some early wins, in part because salespeople tend to be more mobile. But now that you've got tablet devices that are more touch sensitive, they actually can do more with closing deals more quickly. A lot of things with digitization and just making what used to be a huge paper stack much more manageable, much easier to update. You're talking with one company where they were able to digitize and put into a mobile device and the factory floor old equipment manuals, and that actually improved safety and was able to enable them to deliver training more quickly. And I think really the key thing is once the projects get started, it sparks a great deal of creativity. There's always new ideas that come out of this when you actually get on the ground and start doing things. So in that same webinar I mentioned, we also asked this group of people what elements of their organization they felt had the greatest possibility of being transformed through an improved mobile strategy. And I actually think that we could call this an improved platform strategy. That the more you think about the different platforms on which you're delivering content to people, the more you can think about what do we stand to gain. Platform is not just a delivery mechanism, it's an integral part of the workflow. And there are ways that you can improve the workflow by improving the platform. The ones that I want to highlight here are that they definitely see impact in the ability to share knowledge more seamlessly. There's a lot of operational efficiency that they stand to gain, and they're looking at a lot of productivity. And this is in direct contrast with 12 months ago when people were telling me they couldn't imagine why anybody would want to do this. Now, these are not necessarily direct revenue generators, but they are measurable, and they are things that even the most slow-moving organization can look to and say, yeah, we can see if we improve operational efficiency, that's going to have a big impact on our bottom line. So it's going to start to move a lot more organizations forward. So what do these customers want from us as suppliers and as vendors and as publishers? They really want to be part of the development process. Even of those companies that are not yet moving forward very quickly yet with their own mobile content delivery, find the people in them that will partner with you and talk with you about what they think their needs will be down the road. There are those thinkers out there. There are people who are moving in that direction, even if today they don't have a robust or a mature mobile strategy. And the more they are part of the process, the easier it's going to be for you to build the things that they're going to want 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, and honestly, 9 months down the road. I mean, it really can change that quickly. They absolutely want us to support commingling of content. This is why I asked Barry the question about siloed information. This is a huge issue for companies, and one that has come up in a lot of the presentations I've given to buy-side audiences, where they're very frustrated by the fact that they now have 150 apps of content that they have no way of coordinating and intermingling and even combining with their own internal content, and that's what they really want to be able to do. They really want, the enterprise customer wants you to understand the difference between their needs and consumer needs. They are not a consumer audience. They have very different buying patterns from what consumers have. There's a much different need to bring different stakeholders into the process. You absolutely have to understand that in order to make it successful. And they want you to create a seamless experience for them across the different platforms. They don't want to have one one user experience if they're looking at your mobile app, and a completely different one if they're looking at your website or your login product. Really have to find a way to solve that problem. And I mean, I definitely take Barry's point about you don't necessarily want the same development team building your mobile app or your mobile experience as you have your web experience, but they've got to at least be using the same vocabulary. They've got to be singing from the same hymnal. Otherwise, you're really going to confuse your customer. I think the smartest thing that most B2B publishers can do is communicate your platform strategy, which of course precludes that you have one. But be transparent about it. Talk to people about it. Buyers get very excited when they can see vendors working this stuff out. It helps them feel like they're really part of the process. It helps them feel more confident in doing business with you today if they know where you're heading. And the more you can communicate that platform strategy with them, they're going to give you feedback too. They're going to tell you what pieces aren't working and what pieces might be a little off for them. And that's going to help you improve that strategy. I also think that we can be a partner to our own customers in helping them develop their own platform strategy. The things that you are working out about how to deliver content in different environments to different people with different needs are directly applicable to the same business problems that they're trying to solve for their own customer base. I think this is a really unique place where the needs of the buyer and the needs of the seller actually converge in a really exciting way. And there's an opportunity for us to really figure this out as a joint project over the next couple of years. So there's a number of ways to get more value from some of the things I've said today. I'll be here throughout the session tomorrow. I love to talk about our research. I love to talk about what we're learning. And as you can tell, I talk really fast when I get excited. And it's also the 2 Diet Cokes. But we can provide a custom briefing on anything that we've presented and look at some different elements of the research. There's a lot more that we know that I'm able to present in this short period. We also do audience research. So if there are things that you want to know about your own audience base, then we can help extract some of that information and compare it, overlay it to what we know about the industry and talk about what that can do for you. I love questions. I love research, and I really want to hear about your own issues and see how we can figure out what the next phase of mobile delivery looks like.
Great. Thank you, Robin. So for boot camp next, I know that we've been shifting some things around. Teri, I believe you're next, or is it Barry?
Teri, Barry?
We're not even sure. We've been just shifting things
Teri.
around here. It's Teri. Okay. Oh, we have actually a question. Larry.
Larry.
Could you talk more about who the subject for
Yes.
Enterprises, but
Enterprise companies. So, for example, I can't talk about specific companies because they're all promised anonymity, but among our customer base are going to be the major accountancies, a lot of investment banks, major healthcare organizations, not like a single hospital, but a healthcare group that's going to have a need to deliver content across a number of different areas, government agencies that have responsibility across international boundaries. So actually European government agencies were part of this project. In phase 2, we talked to some agricultural businesses and manufacturing and pharmaceutical.
and what percentage were U.S. based versus non-U.S.?
I would say that it was about half and half. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good guess. Other questions? Okay, and I'm here the whole time.